This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya, from the Fort Hall School of Government. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning, but we also take a look at some of the political pieces that we call cartoon in this country. Today is the 11th of June, 2021, and I am 2M.
I am CS.
And I am GK. In case you missed the headlines, here they are. In the Daily Nation, budget of debt, hope. In Standard, more pain, huge debt in budget. And in the Star, Yatani walks a tightrope in COVID budget.
Fantastic.
2M.
Yes, and if there's a better indication that there'll be no election in 2022, it has to be yesterday's budget. And we say this because IBC was allocated 15 billion shillings for this financial year. Now, you all may think that that allocation was for referendum. Well, you're not wrong, but you're also not right. And here's why. I'll begin by asking, if the referendum is a game of secondary thrust, what is the game of primary thrust? And the answer is simple. The game of primary thrust is the dissolution of parliament. And that's because the dissolution of parliament will trigger an election. Therefore, should we have an election of parliament, why should we not have a referendum at the same time? What if the game plan is to have an election of parliament and a referendum at the same time? But I'd like to be more devious. Professor Mutai Ngonyi always says the best strategy is the obvious strategy. You see, the courts will soon have their say on what the dissolution of parliament means. In our view, dissolve parliament alone. Senators and MP go home. Governors, MCAs, and the president remain in office. And if the courts tell UHURU dissolve, UHURU will have no choice but to dissolve. And that's because UHURU always follows court orders. Bottom line, we are not going to have an election in 2022. If we have an election this year, Parliament will have a fresh 5-year term. And that's how a new 5-year term of governors, MCAs, and Kenya's 001 kicks in. UHURU ain't going nowhere. But then again, I could be wrong.
Oh, that's a bold prophecy.
But nah.
I want to take a slightly different tangent.
Yeah.
Biggest budget ever. Inevitably, what will follow in coming days is plenty of analysis. Some of it good, some of it bad, some of it ugly. Already we can hear the murmurs of Kenya's supposed debt crisis. Unfortunately, most of those who delve into these arguments rarely want to acknowledge all the major investments that have been made by the president, which have not only accelerated economic growth, but have also laid a foundation for future exponential growth. As things stand, Kenya's GDP more than doubled from just over 4 trillion in 2013 to over 10 trillion today. What sort of sorcery do we imagine brought this about? It's the major investments that the president has been making. Just to give one example, electricity connectivity in 2014 stood at 32%, while now we are at approximately 75%. We are in fact unrivaled in the region. In Ethiopia, connectivity stands at 30%. In Tanzania, it is at 33%. In Uganda, it is at 23%. In Rwanda, it is at 30%. All our neighbors are where we were 7 years ago, and they all have far less than double what we have.
Oh, yes.
This comparison is not in vain because energy is essential for growth, not just internally for manufacturing and industry, but competitively, it makes us a far more attractive destination for investments. That investment in energy will be essential to powering our growth, literally.
Yes.
And that is just one example. There are numerous. That said, there can be better resource stewardship, and resources can be utilized a lot better. And the president has been at the forefront of advocating for this, because all he has been able to achieve, he therefore sees the potential that is still latent. Hence, we sometimes see his frustration when people fight his efforts to plug the leaks. Ironically, the same people who will complain about ballooning debt, mostly civil society, are the same people who reject the improved accountability and resource stewardship measures that the president is keen to institute and implement. The President has told us that there are 4 ways we can improve resource stewardship. At the county level, governors should be required to be accountable to county assemblies, and further, the Senate should oversee all county funds and not just devolved funds. This translates to greater accountability and transparency. Furthermore, another proposal is to require that both national and county governments should be required to include explanations of the previous, current, and proposed budgetary measures that are aimed at securing economic and social rights. Finally, in order to quickly avoid funds being lost where there are irregularities, a financial control measure has been fronted, proposing to empower the CS Finance to stop the transfer of funds to a state organ or other public entity or a county government where there are serious and persistent material breaches of the set out financial control measures, and to table the matter before the relevant House of Parliament for approval. All said and done, whether it's the budget, the major investments, and the progressive changes to our laws, I often struggle to understand why people are so intent on fighting the president.
Beautiful.
Thank you. I'm still on budget. So intense politics creates a constant temptation to use the budget process to score symbolic points rather than to confront the difficult budgetary trade-offs that grow increasingly problematic with every passing year. Context is important. First, with the overall implementation of devolution in 2013, we must recognize that the 47 counties came with a large and expensive invoice.
Correct.
This means that from when President Uhuru took power, the government has expanded and the budget had to follow suit. Firstly, the government isn't a charity, and Kenyans voted for the 2010 constitution and all its benefits of devolved healthcare, education, among other things.
Yes.
There have been some very successful aspects of devolution, ones that have enhanced the national quality of life, and these, I believe, are the achievements that have created enough political space for Jubilee to keep investing in devolution.
Yeah.
Counties will now receive 370 billion, a 17% increase from the current 316.5 billion.
Yes.
And this is a big win for counties.
Yes.
We also need to acknowledge the political question, the correlation of popular demands, underlying sentiments, ideas that determine fiscal policy.
Yeah.
The coronavirus pandemic brought about a new economic reality. In response to this, Uhuru's administration enacted policies that worked to stabilize and accelerate the economy. It has set aside 14.3 billion for the purchase of COVID-19 vaccines and is hopefully making plans to locally manufacture. Masks, sanitizers, ventilators are duty-free for the next year. Focusing on restoring the dignity of Kenyan citizens, 47.7 billion was allocated for universal health coverage.
Whoa.
And to vulnerable populations, the government has set aside 37.8 billion. This is for social protection, affirmative action, and poverty reduction efforts. For SMEs, government allocated an additional 2 billion shillings for the credit guarantee scheme, and this will be on top of the 10 billion that was allocated in the last financial year. If the Kenyan government is the biggest spender in this economy, then government needs to ensure that money circulates more to those at the bottom of the pyramid. This we can agree on. It is rather obvious that this government's budget has been fairly capital intensive, roads, rails, ports, and all sorts of things, and is looking at the future of economic growth. But it is also important that they look to investments in human capital, agriculture, and the informal sector, which I think it is collaboratively doing. So on that note, we had 3 headlines, and we have a 3-part criteria that we use. We ask ourselves, are they topical, speculative, repetitive or groundbreaking, thoughtful, or just plain lazy? The Daily Nation and the Standard took a very sort of pessimistic outlook. I quite like the start because Yatani had a very hard job to do.
Yes,
I agree.
absolutely.
And I think he did a...
Yeah, I think, and also Taifa Leo, if you bought Taifa Leo, Standard and Nation today, please use them as toilet paper.
So can we give the star our winning headline? There you have it.
Now, our final thought. It is inspired by a book entitled Take Pride by Jessica Tracy.
Nice. Before you go, can I give a summary of the week?
Please go ahead.
So this week we've been looking at the 7 deadly sins and basically referring to behaviors and habits that are considered amongst the most cardinal of vices under Christian teachings. So on Tuesday, we looked at wrath using the book The Age of Anger by Pankaj Mishra. The author's premise is that large parts of the world are retracing the past, reliving the traumas and violent dislocations that Europe experienced during its transition to modernity in the 18th and 19th centuries. This trauma, he explains, is being felt most by the young man of promise in the countries that arrived late to capitalism, globalization, and enlightenment. On Wednesday, we looked at greed. Greed is the excessive or insatiable desire and pursuit of material possessions, especially for excess wealth, status, power, or food. We reviewed the book The Ugly Renaissance, Sex, Disease, and Excess in an Age of Beauty by Alexander Lee, where he shows us the very human side of the great artists and their wealthy patrons. For instance, Michelangelo, who is famous for his masterpiece marble sculpture titled David, but he frequently got into bar fights. And finally, on Thursday, we looked at the book Gluttony by Francine Prose. And the author asked the question, who does gluttony harm except the glutton himself?
Yeah.
And so basically early theologians had two answers to this question. First, worship of the senses in general and the sense of taste in particular turns our attention away from holy things and becomes a substitute for the worship of God. And the second reason is what Prose calls the gateway sin argument, that gluttony, so the story goes, relaxes our moral guard, paving the way for other sins. And today we're looking at pride.
I love it.
Today's book, Take Pride, was written by Jessica Tracy, a professor of psychology at the University of British Columbia, and who is an emotion researcher. In this book, she is able to decipher and unpack pride in a way that demonstrates that it can actually be both useful or constructive on the one hand, as well as potentially destructive. She brings out the point that if we understand the nature of pride and segregate its dark elements, therefore only retaining its potentially positive attributes, then we can harness pride to become super achievers. Being the social beings that humans are, we are often conscious of our social standing. And because of this, pride makes us care about how others see us and how we see ourselves. Pride makes us strive for excellence. The right dose of pride can inspire feats of genius and can confer power and prestige on those who display it. That said, in a yin and yang sort of duality, pride can also push people towards acts of insanity and self-destructiveness, bringing out the worst in people in an effort to ensure they secure the praise of other people and to be seen in good light. The dark side of pride can lead to cunning and deception in pursuit of power and praise. The first 6 of the book's 7 chapters are devoted to an analysis of how pride is expressed in different cultures and a revealing exploration of narcissism, from the word Narcissus. The last chapter, however, is where her primary thesis lies, where she highlights how we can use pride to our advantage.
Nice.
Fantastic. I love the chapter like a boss.
Wonder why.
The central thesis of this chapter therein is why human beings have pride. Why do we floss? Why is it okay to showcase our material wealth? You know where we get it from? We get it from apes, from chimpanzees and the gorillas. And this is called the bluff display. In fact, Jessica tells us that primatologists have observed that non-verbal displays that look a lot like pride in several of our non-human primate relatives. Perhaps most famous is a chest-beating drum performance by mountain gorillas, made famous by that super-sized cinematic gorilla King Kong. But confident or self-congratulatory behaviors like this have been documented in other primates too. Dominant catarrhine monkeys have been described as standing a bit taller and conveying a strutting, confident air. Some of our closest ape relatives, chimpanzees, are also known to make on an expansive expression when they're in the presence of a subordinate chimpanzee. Primatologists call this a bluff display because it has the effect of making an animal appear larger when they stand upright. She compares this bluff display to a form of fake it till you make it display or displays of wealth, that the conspicuous consumption, the art of buying the more expensive name brand version of certain products like luxury cars or watches and handbags is purely for the sake of sending a message about one's wealth. And my view, there is nothing wrong with that. Only that we should give apes more credit than they deserve. I'm an Namnagani, my friend.
Well, the fake it till you make it.
Yes.
All right, so I have a research experiment I'd like to carry out. You're walking down the street to MNCS.
Yes.
You come across 1,000 shillings on the floor.
Yeah.
You pick it up, right? So let's say 2M, you pick it up first.
Yes.
Would you be inclined to share it with CS?
Yes. He probably deserves it more.
You would give the 1,000 shilling that you picked up to CS.
Yeah.
Wow. CS, what would you do?
Nyama choma njogonas.
So you would treat him to nyama choma. Okay, so let's say for a stranger, you're walking upon you come across the 1,000 shilling note, and you come across, and a stranger also comes across it, but you pick it up first. Would you be inclined to share with a stranger?
Yes, I'll just give it to him.
You would?
Yeah.
Wow, how nice of you.
Yeah.
Most people wouldn't. Anyway,
give it
but what was interesting, so what she found, so she did an experiment. In America, like you guys have said, a lot of them would be inclined to share what they have found, their windfall, out of luck, 50-50. And how they arrive at the 50-50 is what they perceive to be fair. And this is what is called a cultural norms. So Jessica spends quite a bit of the book talking about cultural norms. And she says that it is what is fair is determined by these cultural norms. So you feel pride when you see yourself as meeting or even better exceeding society's norms. So by sharing and being kind, 2M is trying to show people, look how nice I am, that I'd give you the 1,000 shilling note. And so she goes on to then explain that pride allows us to learn and fully encode what our cultural norms are so that we continue to do them. As a result, pride is one of the emotions most directly responsible for a phenomenon she called, or is known as, cumulative cultural evolution. So this is the force that led to the majority of advances and innovations that we see in the world. And this cumulative cultural evolution is underpinned by social learning. So allowing ourselves as a human species to benefit from what others have already learned is a far more expedient and efficient way to innovate, to develop skills. You don't have to start from scratch every time. So they say the cumulative cultural evolution is underpinned by 3 distinctive cognitive accomplishments of the human species. One, there needs to be an ability to develop skills and acquire useful knowledge, right? So caveman learned fire, how to, hunt and gather and all that. 2, there needs to be an ability to share this knowledge with others. So they come together in mutual protective associations, they share their knowledge so that they can survive as a species. 3, there needs to be an ability to effectively learn shared cultural knowledge so that the process can start all over again, but not from scratch. So whatever you've learned from, you keep adding on to that and you keep sharing that knowledge and it keeps circulating. And they say that she says that each of the 3 motivations benefits hugely from this idea of pride, because we want to become the sort of person that society wants us to be, and pride also pushes us to create and build. And I just want to underpin 2 things that Sia said earlier. There's 2 types of pride. There's the authentic pride, which gets us to engage in our most moral behaviors, the sharing of the money that you found on the floor, helping people who are in need, giving away possessions to the most vulnerable, and being good citizens who go out, vote, and do their civil duties, etc. And then there's the more hubristic pride. And her examples here were interesting. It was people like Steve Jobs or Bill Gates. And she says that you're in the service of attaining power and dominance or impressing others, rather than out of pure desire for mastery and accomplishment, which I found was interesting. I don't know if we can really... what they did changed humanity for all of us today. So I don't know if it was purely selfish in that way, but pride helped them move along, right? So pride forces us to innovate and to move forward. So I want to end with that. There's a quote. When dealing with people, remember, you are not dealing with creatures of logic, but with creatures bristling with prejudice and motivated by pride and vanity. And that's by Dale Carnegie, who wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People. We had a star as the winning headline. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, but find us on TV. We're on GoTV,